Hello, so I'm Matt, and this is the second of the films that I've made of me glazing the first glaze over a grisaille underpainting. And here I didn't show it, but I brushed on some medium. So whatever medium you want to use is okay. I use, it's a walnut alkyd medium by M. Graham. It suits me because I don't like mediums with any mineral spirits. They disagree with me. So anyway, here I am. I'm just rubbing it down. This is called oiling out the surface. I've got a fairly limited palette just for this painting, this portrait, and so it's got starting with white. I think I've got something like definitely got a raw sienna and a yellow, benzodrine yellow, and cadmium red, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and a warm sap green and a black. It's ivory black. And I'm just going over the first sort of the base note of the skin tone. And at the moment, the easiest way I found to do that is to mix a bit of alizarin crimson with cadmium red and some sap green just to cool it down. When I film myself painting, I still have to find the most ergonomic setup. So at the moment I'm sort of stretching across because I've got the camera filming over my shoulder. But it still gives you an idea. At the moment if I need a little bit more colour, I'll just press slightly harder to allow more paint from the brush to go onto the board, to the painted surface. And I'm just interested, just sort of feeling my way through some of the shadow tones, but I'm just using the same mix. I don't want to have too much on my brush. I mean, in hindsight, actually looking at this film, I think I'd like to have the surface fairly wet with the medium. I'm not sure if it's too wet here. Or if I've just got sort of too much paint on, but it's something that you can always adjust later. You're just constantly moving the paint around, and I'll use dry brushes later to just sort of pick some of the paint off the surface and then just to put it down and just move it around. But at the moment it's just the very first suggestion of skin colour. So I learned to use reds and greens from Lewis Smith. I went on a workshop that he was holding at the Manchester Academy of Art, and I found it very valuable. There's a lot of mixes of alizarin with sap green, or you'd have cadmium red with viridian being sort of a much cooler green used for sort of darker shadows. So I do use that, I just haven't got that on this palette at the moment. There's my white, it's just started to dribble down. But just as a sort of counter to, you don't want it to be overly warm. So the alizarin crimson and the sap green seems to just sort of work very well. Just again, it's something that I can work into later with velaturas when I start to use a few more whites. A few more colours with white mixed into them. So for darker shadow tones, I'll just use, a little bit more green, a little bit more alizarin, all mixed in together. obviously it seems it felt like it was okay. I could just use that for the hair. It's sort of it's a general. It's warm, but it's not overly warm, so it still works for the hair. And because it's oil and because there's lots of medium, I can just spend a long time pulling it off, putting it back on, moving all the paint around, and I'll spend a while in this session putting different values in, different hues, just sort of playing around with it. But just the important thing is at the very beginning, just starts to just get a feel for the skin tones in this particular portrait. You can see that's the sort of warm sap green. The sap greens can be different. I've used this one is the Winsor and Newton sap green, but I've also got a Michael Harding sap green, and so quite a posh one, but it just has a different quality. It's quite a cool one, so I think I'll probably do a portrait soon with that on the palette, and I'll use that sap green for some of the shadow tones, but it's closer to Viridian. It's not as acidic or sharp as Viridian. That's just the really brilliant thing about this technique as well, painting with a grisaille, is all the drawings done, and it's just a lot of playing around with the colour at this stage. So it's not fixed. If I don't like it, I can just wipe it off, or I can use a dryer brush, as I said, and just move that around. So you just sort of don't need to worry at all. Certainly, if you were if you were going to oil out with maybe linseed oil, it would be wet for days, but at least a couple of days. So you could just sort of spend ages moving it, putting it on, taking it off if you weren't happy with it. So it's got a lot of flexibility, but the thing is that the drawing is there, so that's not something you need to worry about so much. The main reason I started using this technique originally was because I just, if the drawing wasn't right in a portrait, then you just end up, it's such a sort of hassle trying to sort of keep up with the drawing, make sure the drawing's correct, while you're also worrying about hue and value and all of that. This way I've got the sort of foundation in place, and I can start to just give it more depth. It's quite effective for working with hair as well, particularly I'm using a hog's hair brush, because there's just such thin veils of glazes, and when the drawing's there, you can just go over it, and it just adds that softness, which is what hair is. It's just it just has a sort of blurred effect, really. And because all of the colours are at this stage relatively similar, I can just move around the whole portrait, just sort of, at the moment I'm using a photo for reference, but even if I'm sort of painting from life, I can just, again, it's just a very sort of playful moment, and I can just paint the same tones, can go all over, because they're not going to be the overall tone, or when I say tone, I mean colour. It's not going to be, it's not fixed. It'll change. Velachuras are going to go on. There's lots of other glazes that are going to go on top of these. So it's just always changes. It's very fluid, and it's just not something to worry about. It's just going over the drawing, and it just deepens, and I am constantly drawing as I do it. That's part of what the value creates the structure as well, just as much as the tone. I should really get some larger brushes, but I quite like just these. I think they're size 2 or 3, um, but just possibly easier for modelling. Now I'm going to start adding some velaturas. So I've got a bit of white. It's titanium white that I'm using. And it just helps to sort of begin adding it into the highlighted areas and mixing it into the glazes that I've already added in the shadows. Again, not worrying, allowing it to mix not just on the palette but on the canvas itself. And I use the velaturas in the same way that I use the glazes, just to model the forms as I go, so the drawing doesn't stop. The crucial point is not I'm trying not to go over the original drawing, the grisaille that's there, that really I have to preserve as long as possible. It'll always show through the colours that I add. And when I'm talking about drawing, I'm just adding bits to it and developing that drawing, but I've got to really make sure that I don't cover it, otherwise it's lost and there was no point in doing it in the first place. As I go, I do notice that there are areas in the grisaille where it didn't work, or the drawing wasn't right to begin with, and so I can just develop that. So as long as the drawing is still visible and I never let go of that, then it's always possible to go over with another glaze. I can draw into it, and I can deepen it, or I can add more velaturas. You can't go wrong as long as you're not doing the glazes too thickly. They have to be really, really thin, just so that you can still see the grisaille, and then that just holds everything together, and you've always got a second chance. It's really for the purposes of this demonstration that I'm trying to do, as much as I am doing, just so that I can just show the scope of the possibilities in the first glaze. There are other paintings that I've done where, as I said, I would have been happy at this stage, take a dry brush out, really just start to sort of blend in the paint that's already on the board, on the picture surface, and so it's just a very sort of delicate glaze, but because I can still go over it, and I can go over it 10, 20, 30 times.